distinguished guests, audience online in China and throughout the world. Good morning and good afternoon. Thanks for joining this webinar. I would like to welcome you to the official launch of World Migration Report 2022, the Chinese edition. My name is Chu Mei. I'm a research fellow from Center for China and Globalization. It's a great honor to moderate this meeting. This is co-hosted by the Center for China and Globalization and the International Organization for Migration. Center for China and Globalization, CCG, is a leading non-governmental think tank based in Beijing and the leader of discussions in various aspects of globalization, including migration. IOM, the International Organization for Migration, is a leading intergovernmental organization in the field of migration. It is a principal UN migration agency, works closely with governmental, intergovernmental, and non-governmental partners. CCG and IOM have worked for the fifth time to make the IOM's flagship publication, World Migration Report, available in Chinese language. The World Migration Report 2020 is the 11th in the World Migration Report series. It has been produced to contribute to increased understanding of migration and mobility throughout the world. As a member of the translation team, I know that every translator has did his or her best, and the team at IOM and headquarters provided patient guidance and support. So I would like to say thank you to everyone who helped with translating this report and organizing the event. The event will be started by introductory remarks from Dr. Hongri Wang, President of CCG, and Mr. Giuseppe Crociti, Chief of Mission in China of IOM. Unfortunately, Dr. Wang is on a flight now, so he's unable to attend the event, but he has recorded a speech for this event. Following both gentlemen's remarks, I'll invite Dr. Marie Macaulay, Head of Migration Research Division and the editor of the World Migration Report, IOM headquarters, to introduce the report officially. It's also my pleasure to be joined today by 5 distinguished expert panelists. They are Professor Tony Fang. He's a Steve Jarislowsky Chair in Economic and Cultural Transformation, Memorial University. He's also a guest professor at School of Economics and Management at Strasbourg University. Welcome. And Mr. Todd Jackson. He's a U.S. Policy and Business Director for the Yingzhong Consulting Group. Welcome. And Mr. Mike Liu, who is sitting beside me. He's a Vice President of China Global Talent Society. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And Professor Liu Yipeng. Professor Liu is a founding dean of Yellow River College of Business. And he's also professor and director of Center for China Management and Global Business at the University of Reading. And Professor Zhang Zhenjiang, he's a dean of School of International Studies or Academy of Overseas Chinese Studies at Jinan University. Thank you all for participating in this meeting. Without further ado, I'd like to warmly welcome Dr. Wang for his welcome speech. Please.
Good day, Mr. Giuseppe Crociti and Ms. Mary McLeod, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the launch of the event for the Chinese edition of the World Migration Report 2022. This event is co-organized by International Organization for Migration of UN and the Center for China and Globalization, CCG. On behalf of the organizers, particularly on the CCG, I would like to thank you all for participating here today and your interest in our latest report. Actually, this book was launched by IOM, but it was translated and published in China. So again, thank you for really attention to this event. In the era of globalization, nation states are ever more interconnected and interdependent with one another. However, the emergence of the COVID-19 global pandemic has presented itself as one of the direst adversaries for the globalization and negatively impacted various aspects of it, including the mobility of a global population, global talent, and the global community. As a response to the pandemic, states have enacted travel restrictions to reduce the health risk associated with international travel. Still, it has also prevented hundreds of millions of people from traveling, left thousands of migrants stranded or in need of assistance. The migration issues brought about by the pandemic are common challenges shared by all mankind. This challenge will allow us to reflect on our attitudes towards global crises, such as this one. So when we overcome this crisis, we are better prepared to face the coming decades that are still filled with uncertainties. In order to promote global understanding of the topic of migration, the International Organization of Migration established in the World Migration Report in year 2000 and has produced 11 reports to date. CCG has been annually published World Migration Report, translate them into Chinese, and I'm very proud to be a partner of IOM to publish this in China. Through its accurate and concise language, the report illustrates the changing phenomena in world migration, providing an authoritative account of the world migration trends and key issues arising from migration. This year's edition of the World Migration Report looks at the development in migration in the past 2 years and in the context of COVID-19, while it also answers many other questions beyond the COVID-19 focus, including the important topics such as the links between peace and migration, on disinformation of migration, on countering human trafficking, in migration pathways, and on climate change impacts. For Chinese readers worldwide, the Chinese version of the World Migration Report is an essential source of information on global migration developments. Center for China Globalization has been translating the Chinese version of this series report since 2013, and the World Migration Report 2022 is the 5th report we have translated and published. We are grateful to the International Organization of Migration for its long-standing trust and support in CCG. Center for China Globalization is the first Chinese independent think tank to be ranked among the top 100 think tanks in the world 5 years in a row. And we have been also granted the United Nations Special Consultant status as the only think tank in China. We adhere to our principles such as being international, impact, and constructive in an effort to provide a global perspective to China and Chinese perspective to the world. We are dedicated to the research in the field of globalization, global governance, international migration, international relations, and international talent mobility. The World Migration Report 2022 shows that in the 2020, China is the world's fourth largest source of international migrants and second largest expatriate remittance inflow country. China contributes a large amount of talent to global development and benefit from international talent flow. The recently released the report of 20th National Congress of the CPC mentions that education, science and technology, and the talent are the fundamental and strategic support for the comprehensive construction of a modern China. And again, mention gathering talents from all over the world and strengthening the great unity of Chinese people at home and abroad. So this shows how China attaches great importance to the talent, global talent around the world, and support IOM work in this respect. In promoting China's participation in global migration governance, CCG has not only translated the World Migration Report for many years, but promoted the establishment of national immigration administration, as well as the promoting various policies, including improving the treatment of the Chinese green card holders and 10-year multiple entry visa for the with the other countries, and also the green card policy in China. So moreover, in 2020, CCG proposed a policy that relaxed entry requirements for foreign multinational corporation executives and Chinese abroad. Those efforts assisted the recovery of China's contribution to the globalization in the face of global crisis. As China matures its experience to combat COVID-19, China is gradually, while container virus is relaxing its entry restriction. Since August, according to the government guidelines, traveling personnel holding valid APEC cards and foreign students with valid study resident permit provided with appropriate document are now freely entered in China without having to reapply a visa. In September 2022, Chinese authorities have also indicated that border restriction would be relaxed to allow some foreign tourists and visitors to enter the country. Additionally, the travel quarantine has also been reduced to 14+7 to 7+3. Lately, on October 25, Chinese National Development and Reform Commission and 6 other departments explicitly asked localities to make good use of the express way for the movement of Chinese and foreign personnel and facilitate mobility of executives, technicians, and their families from multinational companies and foreign investment enterprises. So I firmly believe that international travel and cross-border movement will be restored to the vivid scene that is before the pandemic. We hope that they will come soon. And the Chinese edition of 2022 World Migration Report has arrived just in time. CCG is proud to organize this launching event with IOM. Once again, I would like to express my appreciation for all our guests, for their support, and online audience for their participation. We wish the success of this event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wang, for preparing this speech. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to Mr. Giuseppe Crocchetti, Chief of Mission in China of IOM, for his welcoming remarks. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like at the outset to thank Dr. Wang and the whole CCG team for their support in hosting the virtual launch of the 2022 World Migration Report in China, which will be followed by what will surely be a very engaging and highly qualified panel discussion. IOM has had the pleasure to partner with CCG for many years in joint research, as well as in the release of the Chinese edition of IOM's flagship publication, the World Migration Report, which consistently features in the top downloaded publications on the IOM's global website. The report provides a useful evidence base on migration topics and trends globally, and it is a key tool to help all of us, be it scholars, practitioners, or policymakers, to navigate such complex issues, particularly at a time of uncertainty when multiple crises around the world are having profound impacts on migration and mobility. These crises demand both balanced reflection and informed action. I take, therefore, this opportunity to encourage webinar participants to download the report and help further disseminate it through your networks. Nowadays, more and more information on migration is becoming available to us globally. However, the interconnected world we live in often makes statistical data inadequate alone to fully capture the dynamic, complex, and fast-paced nature of migration processes. This is precisely why IOM has made major efforts over time in developing a comprehensive dedicated web page on the World Migration Report, featuring several useful resources, including data snapshots and toolkits for educators, policymakers, as well as fact checkers to debunk common misperceptions or misrepresentations around key migration data, patterns, and trends. And my colleague, Mary McCauley, will shortly speak to that. Plus, the World Migration Report was drafted and launched prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which later impacted and still impacts people mobility. The ongoing pandemic reminds us just how volatile the world is becoming and how likely the world is to experience an increasing number of migration shocks in future, for which governments across the globe will need to prepare. Profound technological change was already happening before COVID-19 and has significantly intensified during the pandemic. Shaping migration and mobility systems to reduce the impacts of inequality in a world that is suffering multiple digital divides will be important in ensuring implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And these are all topics the World Migration Report covers extensively. It is widely recognized that migration is influenced by and contributes vice versa to influence development, peace, and security. This is especially true in a world confronted by the triple threats of a health crisis, a climate crisis, and an economic crisis. The negative effects of this compounded crisis risk to further widen the global North-South divide and compromise the gains already made in realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. To this end, IOM Director General Antonio Vitorino recently welcomed China's announcement of the Global Development Initiative as a contribution to the acceleration and timely achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals globally. Member states can turn to the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, which builds on the 2030 Agenda, in order to renew and translate the commitments into actions, as they have done it at the International Migration Review Forum earlier this year in New York, on the premise that no country can manage migration alone. The notion of partnership brings me to our webinar, which is testimony of IOM's continued and fruitful partnership with think tanks, of which CCG is a prominent example. It also shows our sustained engagement with academia, represented today by eminent academic experts and institutions. Indeed, good migration governance requires both wall of government and wall of society efforts due to the invaluable role that think tank, academia, media, private sector, the UN, international organization, and the broader civil society can play. Allow me to conclude my remarks by thanking once again our host, Dr. Wang, and his dedicated and competent team at CCG for being a long-term partner of IOM, and by thanking our distinguished panelists and presenters who have agreed to be with us today to reflect together on the relevance of the 2022 World Migration Report to policy research priorities of the academic communities in China and globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crocetti. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Marie McAuliffe. She's joining us from Geneva. Dr. McAuliffe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can see the slides okay.
Yes,
Just
yes.
wait for. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And really delighted to be joining you today. Special thanks, of course, to CCG and Dr. Wang, as well as IOM's Chief of Mission, of course, Mr. Crocetti. It is a real delight to be partnering again with CCG as China's leading think tank in terms of globalization, bringing the research, the evidence to China through this very important translation. So we're really delighted to be partnering again with CCG, and we thank the translation team. It's a large report, and thank you very much for all of your efforts. What I will do in the next sort of 15 or so minutes is really just provide some insights from the report. It is a substantial report. It's a truly global report. We try and capture the range of dynamics that are occurring around the world in regards to migration and mobility. So really my job here is just to provide a few insights and encourage you, as Mr. Crocetti said, to access the report in the Chinese language and the other languages that are available, and to really interrogate and have a look at that evidence, the analysis, and use it in your jobs and in your work. And that's what we've found through our review processes, through our evaluation processes, to continuously improve on the report, and we welcome your feedback on the report, of course, too. So just to situate the World Migration Report, IOM's flagship report that has been produced since the year 2000. I just thought I would just mention the mission, how the evidence base is really important to IOM's mission. Of course, we work on operational issues as well. We certainly uphold the human dignity and well-being of migrants. That's core to our mission. Encourage social and economic development, including through the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, Regular Migration and the Sustainable Development Goals, of course. But here, with this contribution, the World Migration Report is about advancing evidence-based understanding of migration issues, including in an environment in which we know misinformation and disinformation on a range of topics, including migration and migrants, is increasing. From our Director General, just highlighting here from the forward of the World Migration Report, I guess 2 key points that I've bolded here. Our rationale for the report is to provide in clear and accurate terms changes that are occurring. So we look at the global trends, the regional trends, as well as key and complex issues in migration every 2 years. It's also our obligation, including as a United Nations agency, as an intergovernmental organization, to demystify the complexity and the growing diversity around human mobility. So this is what we seek to do every 2 years through the World Migration Report. A quick recap, and again, as Dr. Wang highlighted, CCG has been partnering with us on Chinese translations for several editions, of course. We have put emphasis on making sure that languages are expanded for accessibility of readers all around the world. So in the year 2000, this is when the first report was produced. It was previously a thematic report, so it covered a very specific theme, such as in 2015, it was migrants and cities. But since 2018, we have really listened to readers. We've listened to member states, to our partners who we work with, including applied and academic researchers, and we found that we needed to transform it into a global reference report. So now, since the 2018 edition, we have part 1 on key migration data and information on migrants globally and regionally. And then in part 2, we look at complex and emerging issues. It's strongly aligned to IOM's migration data strategy, as well as the Secretary General's data strategy as well. As we know, data capture, data analysis is increasingly important in our digital world. It's highly collaborative. And as I mentioned, the report outputs, we've put particular emphasis in making sure that the report is accessible. So in 2005, we were just producing in 1 language, that was in English, of course. 2015, we moved up to 5, and I'm pleased to say that for 2020 and 2022, we're moving to 10 languages, all 6 UN languages, as well as others. Across the bottom there, you can see more recently, since 2021, the World Migration Report, I'm really pleased to say, has won a number of international awards. Here is the table of contents for the current edition of the World Migration Report, the 2022 edition. Particularly in the context of Dr. Wang's opening remarks, it's important to highlight how migration and mobility are situated. And in the report overview, we do look at the technological, the geopolitical, and the environmental transformations to situate how migration and mobility is affected by these. I will go through some key highlights from chapters 2 and 3 for you. We'll not be talking about part 2, but I would encourage you, if you're interested in COVID-19's impact on migration and mobility, or if you're particularly working on climate change, to have a look at the contents. The chapters are also downloadable individually in English, and the full report is available completely, full report in Chinese, of course. Now, in terms of chapter 1, as I mentioned, we do situate the changes that are occurring in migration and mobility globally by looking at the 3 really big global transformations that are occurring. And that is not to say that there are not ongoing economic transformations, geographic transformations such as urbanization, for example. But this is really to highlight that the intensification of technological, geopolitical and environmental change is really impacting on migration and human mobility around the world. In chapter 1, because it was IOM's 70th anniversary last year, we also provide some insights in terms of how the organisation has changed and how our regional offices have responded to the growing challenges as well as the growing benefits of international migration. Also, key migration data at a glance, again, getting feedback from readers. We have provided for the first time several pages of key migration data at a glance so that it is able to be used for teaching purposes, for briefing purposes, if you're briefing ministers or senior officials, for teaching, for media, for a range of different aspects. Very quickly, in terms of global trends, just thought I would highlight some key outputs and some key data. But of course, as you can see the blue bar there, we cover a wide range of key themes. We look at international migrants, numbers and trends. We look at international migration flows, migrant workers, remittances is a key issue. And as Dr. Wang mentioned, China is now has become number 2 in terms of the inflows of international remittances globally. We also look at refugees and asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, IDPs, as well as what is new for this edition is the strong focus, of course, on COVID-19, which has had a massive impact on migration and mobility, including various groups of migrants around the world. One thing that might surprise you, it surprises most people when we look at the long-term data, is that we are seeing a global gender gap that is growing in terms of international migrant stock. So what we can see is that while the number of female migrants has grown over time, the growth has not been at the same rates as male migrants. There is a growing gender gap in international migration. So we really need to call into question the previous discussions of the feminization of migration. I would encourage you to look at chapter 2 because we do go into some of the reasons why. We do know, for example, that particular corridors are becoming heavily male, whereas other corridors have gender parity, and that's related to the structure of economies, the occupations that are in demand as well. So I would encourage you to explore the report, including the interactive platform on that particular issue. Again, headline graph just to pique your interest. This is ICAO data looking at air passengers since 1945, and we can see here the very, very dramatic impact of COVID-19. Unprecedented, of course, as you can see in that graph. The blue line is total passengers globally, and then we have it broken down by domestic air passengers as well as international air passengers. And we can see that migrants became stranded around the world in various different settings and different circumstances. The health-related impacts meant that many groups, including migrants, were more vulnerable to the virus. Migrant workers also, at the same time, paradoxically became essential workers, such as in transport, in healthcare, in agriculture and harvesting, some of whom, of course, were even undocumented, but still essential to societies and to economies around the world. And we can also see that the deepening of digitalization in an already digitalizing world has had a really significant impact from COVID. One other graph that I thought I would highlight, again, just to pique your interest, there is analysis around this, but this is looking particularly at internal displacements, so new internal displacements in 2020. And we can see here at the top, this is a particular favorite of mine because we can see here at the top, conflict internal displacement. Just the locations is at a quick glance, you can see that that is much narrower compared to disaster displacement. And here, disaster displacement, we are talking about floods, hurricanes, wildfires, and so forth. If we look at the actual numbers behind the locations, it's 42 countries were affected by new internal displacements due to conflict and violence, the orange at the top, whereas 144 countries were affected by new internal displacements due to disaster, such as floods, hurricanes, and wildfires. In one particular picture, we can see that there is an ongoing and systemic issue when we look at the trend data as well around the growing rate of internal displacements due to disaster. In terms of regional trends and developments, we do look at the 6 UN regions. So here we are talking about Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, Northern America and Oceania. And the reason why we do this is we try and situate, again, some of the big trends, long-term trends, particularly over 30 years for this particular output. And we try and show how comparatively regions have very, very different patterns. And I'll just show you very quickly. You can see on the left-hand side is Asia, and on the right-hand side is Latin America and the Caribbean. And automatically you can see the patterns are extremely different. We can see, for example, that migrants to Asia are fairly similar for also for the Latin America and the Caribbean, very muted, hasn't really changed too much. This is the bar on the left-hand side. But what is very different are the two other bars, migrants within Asia and migrants from Asia. Looks very different to the patterns over the last 30 years from in regards to Latin America and the Caribbean. Migrants within Asia has increased tremendously. There has been a lot of internal migration within the region at the international level, and of course, notwithstanding internal migration as well. Whereas on the right-hand side, we can see that most of the migration is dominated by one region, which is Northern America as the key destination country. And within Northern America, it is, of course, the United States of America over the long period. We can also see, for example, showing this regional comparative analysis, that we have very different approaches in regards to and responses and results in regards to refugees and asylum seekers. On the left-hand side is Africa, and this is actually quite a unique graph. This pattern is not replicated in any of the other UN world regions, is that key countries within Africa are both the origins of large populations of refugees and destinations of large populations of refugees. And of course, these are protracted situations. And as I mentioned, this is rather unique around the world. And you can see it's mainly Eastern Horn of Africa within the African continent. Very different situation on the right-hand side, which is Asia, with the top refugee and asylum seeker countries, where it's usually one country will be either an origin or a destination of refugees and asylum seekers. Very quickly, just want to show you something that is new since the last report. We have engaged with specialists and partners around the world to be producing the interactive platform. It has been tremendously successful, and this is where we've won most of the international awards, because it provides data visualization that is interactive. Users are able to go into the platform to actually look at the key corridors, to be able to look at the long-term trend data, to be able to look at the analysis in real time and interact with it. Depending on which part of the world they're interested in, they can actually then zoom in and look at very specific data outputs. Lastly, and again, running out of time, but thank you so much again for this opportunity. I'd really just like to highlight again how important it is for IOM to be making sure that the World Migration Report is available in many different official languages of different countries. Of course, we are, again, really delighted to be partnering with CCG on the Chinese translation. And with other partners from around the world, and with the support of donors, we've also been able to translate key parts of the report into Swahili, Portuguese, as well as German. And this is particularly important for developing country contexts who need the report in their official languages. Thank you very much again, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. McAuliffe. Thanks for the very concise and informative introduction to the report. I think the report provides us a very comprehensive picture of word migration with strong evidence. And as a Chinese reader, I also noticed that it mentions migration development related to China, such as that China is the largest source countries for international students, and also it's the largest international receivers in Asia. And also, I find that China is upgrading the exit and the entrance administration technology. You wrote there is a case of how in the report how Hong Kong, China is using AI to improve process casing. So there are lots of interesting things in this report, and I think it's really a great book, very professional and insightful. It's more than 500 pages, and I can't believe I think there are lots of huge amounts of hard work behind it and successful coordination. So I really appreciate and I feel honored to translate this report. And I also find that I think it's not just a 500 pages report. It leads us to a much larger world of migration studies, because there are numerous hyperlinks in the report. So the readers can actually reach a much larger pool of migration literature and websites. Just now you mentioned the interactive platform in your presentation. So I think it's very convenient. And actually, when we are translating this report, we add some English terms. We left some English terms so that we think that, well, with that, maybe the Chinese readers, it's easier for them to search for the English term or the English literature directly, instead of going back to the English report and locate the specific terms. So we hope that that will be helpful for the Chinese readers. So thank you. And it's my pleasure now to start the panel discussion. I'd like to invite our distinguished experts to share on this report. And also, most importantly, let's take this opportunity to discuss some very important questions. In the agenda, we wrote down 3 questions. The first one is, what will be the future for word migration under the escalating of global tension? And second one is, what kind of public policies could benefit the migrants? And third one is, what will be China's role in the global governance of international migration? Actually, the first 2 questions are raised from a global perspective, and the third one has a China focus. But of course, I think they are connected with each other. So I think you don't need to strict to question 1 or 2 or 3. Just you can share ideas based on your own understandings. I'll invite the panelists in alphabetic order. But if you have comments, you could just let me know. And you could also raise questions to Mr. Kochiti or Dr. McAuliffe or other panelists. So let me first to welcome Professor Tony Fang. Professor Fang's research interest encompass issues of immigration, pay equity and employment equity, pension, retirement policy, and aging workforce, etc. And as you are based in Canada, could you please explain these questions based on your studies about Canada? Please, Tony, Professor Fang.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for your warm invitation. And I also would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the project team from CCG and also IOM for your successful publication release of the World Migration Report 2022. As a Canadian migration scholar, actually, I just recently arrived in Sichuan, Chengdu, China. about 2 weeks ago, which is Dr. Wang's hometown, I believe, and successfully passed the 7+3 quarantine requirements. And I'm also an honorable recipient of the top talent, the China top talent, our visa. Okay, so my personal experience is testimony that emerging Chinese visa program and traveling program actually working. Okay, so I'm very pleased to be here. So actually, let me see if I can share my slides here. Okay, I have a few. We can see if I can do that. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
So the title is Canada's Immigration Integration System, a New Era, highlighting digital social management innovation in an age of disruption. From that perspective, fully enjoyed Dr. Marie McAuliffe's very comprehensive and very informative presentation on the World Immigration Report, which gave me a lot of food for thoughts. This is my research team. Actually, you can see that it's very multicultural, okay, from very different countries. Most of them actually are immigrants from around the world. And as you know, Canada's an immigration country, a nation of immigrants. And the picture shows that the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, actually welcomed personally the first cohort of Syrian refugee a few years ago at the airport. So there's also some distinctive feature of the Canadian immigration system is that Canada is actually the first country introduced the so-called point system or skill immigration system in the world in 1967. And it has strong actually belief in multiculturalism. And according to the recent OECD report, Canada was ranked #1 in terms of integration effectiveness, and largely driven by Canada's so-called multi-sector model. So we have, we need concerted efforts among, the government, the settlement agencies, and also NGOs in all works of the society. And also we provide very comprehensive settlement and integration services to immigrants, refugees, and more recently, the international students as well. And the other important feature of the Canadian immigration policy is that we take immigration as national strategy, a nation building exercise. As you know, countries like Canada, United States, or Australia are built by immigrants. And so in terms of the policy response to COVID and geopolitics, and Canada considers immigration program as economic recovery strategy. And despite of this slowdown of migration flow around the world and a refugee crisis due to geopolitics, Canada actually allows very ambitious immigration program, so-called 1 million immigrants in 3 years. And in fact, last year, 2021, Canada broke the record by taking more than 400,000, which is more than 1% of the population, the immigration target that was recommended by my research team about 10 years ago. Okay, 10%, 1% of the population in Canada. And so this is also, Canada's also the first country that exit from an immigration recession due to the COVID. So in many ways, we measure the policy effects in a number of different ways. At a micro level, how to maximize national welfare, especially in terms of economic contribution. In the short run, how to fill labor skill shortages. In the long run, to help build a nation and based on multiculturalism. And also at a meso micro level, there are more challenges. Okay, and also Canada has come up a strategy, right, to respond to such challenges. Exactly in the field where Marie just highlighted, digital innovation, social innovation, and management innovation, right? Especially in the area where certain countries have tightened the immigration and international student flows, but on the other hand, the global competition for top talents has become more fierce over time. So this is essentially what the Canada has responded to such competition and challenges. This is just the areas that Canada recently has come up a new policy called the new temporary resident to permanent resident pathway, because the limited migration flow around the world. Canada become more limbo, and by rely on the temporary residents already in China, which include temporary foreign workers and international students. And so this is one of the programs that emerging from that crisis. The second is the reform, dramatic reform of the so-called express entry program, and put a lot of emphasis on the highly skilled immigration schemes, such as the those coming from healthcare, right, because the COVID, and also the STEM fields and the medical fields. And in the refugee field, as you know, Canada has taken disproportionately large number of refugees from first from the Syria, then Afghanistan, and more recently Ukraine refugees. And this is actually the targets, immigration targets, come up recently in 2020 to 2022 to 2024. You can see that the immigration targets actually increasing dramatically over years, and also the number of important reforms. I would really recommend our migration scholars and policymakers to take a close look, and as natural experiment, I guess, in the field of ever-changing field of migration. Okay, and so this is what I when I talk about the so-called digital innovation. This is a lot of recently discussion among the migration scholars and the government and settlement agencies about how to make concerted effort using advanced technology like AI, like big data, and also machine learning, so on, to leverage such digital technology to streamline the migration process. As we know, Canada still have, even we are working very hard to take more immigrants, we still have more than 1 million backlogs, right? Canada still a popular destination like United States and Australia and so on. And so, this advanced technology certainly provide opportunity to streamline process and also improve the settlement integration, both pre-arrival and also post-arrival, and also facilitate community engagement for immigrant refugee integration and settlement. The second one is social innovation. In this area, again, we use very different kind of social experiments, notably so-called economic migration labs across the country, right, to experiment some best or promising practices, right, to better understand the diverse settlement integration needs of immigrants from very different countries or by different immigration class. And there's also potential for so-called co-creation. The beneficiaries getting a say of, to not only top-down approach, but also the immigrant refugee have a say on, how services can be designed, delivered in a more culturally sensitive and racially responsive fashion. Okay, this is a big challenge because the Canadian population become increasingly diverse, and largely because of immigration. And then we talk about miniature innovation. Consider so-called market-based kind of management system to reduce very different kind of inefficiency and employee turnover in the NGO sector, right? Because the overwhelming pressure, right, and the stress due to all those kind of different migration flows, notably large intake refugee population, and also very diverse immigration population and international students. And also we are striving to explore innovative management practices and how to enhance so-called client satisfaction, and seeking a creative way to sustain the settlement sector, right, by creating social enterprises to support long-term mission of the sector. Because time constraint, I would like to stop here. I really would like to listen to the insight and opinions from our other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fang. Thank you for sharing Canadians' experience in migration. And I think both Canada and its neighbor, United States, are the largest migration destinations. And so their policies often get lots of attention. So now I would like to invite Mr. Todd Jackson to share his idea. Mr. Jackson studied in Yunnan province in 2004, and in 2014, he moved back to China again when he served as director of the Northern Rockies Regional Center's China office, where he managed their EB5 program. He currently serves as U.S. policy and business advisor for the Yingzhong Consulting Group. Mr. Jackson, thank you for coming. I think that now, like people say that the Sino-U.S. undergoing a very special moment, and like in this moment, like people from both sides hoping to know more about each other. So I think that maybe migration policies have some role to play in that. So could you please share your ideas regarding these questions, especially from the U.S. perspective? Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. And first, I'd like to thank the Center for China Globalization and the International Organization for Migration for organizing and hosting this webinar for this very comprehensive report release. I think that's very important globally as an issue. So I have worked in the government, in the Senate, and understand a little bit about how our agencies work, which I will share some of those viewpoints with you here in a little bit. As a key destination, I will be speaking specifically about US policy, but as we all know, with the current challenges in the world today and with the different countries, policies and challenges both rhyme country to country. So I think there will be some insight beyond what's going on in America. So I'll discuss the state of US immigration within the current political environment, which is important to understand where our policy is going and where it's been. And I'll highlight some areas that are important to Chinese immigration specifically. So the nature of immigration policy direction is very much a reflection of which political party controls Congress as well as the presidency. Right now, our society is very polarized. Politics are chaotic, especially amidst this midterm elections, which are happening up till next week. Prognosticating on what will happen after that is something of a fool's errand, but there are, however, some issues that we can confidently discuss. The results of this election will be important, and honestly, the control of the House of Congress and Senate could go either way. I personally think the Republicans will take a majority in the House and perhaps the Senate. Even if they control both the House and the Senate, however, it will be such a small majority that I don't expect them to be able to override a presidential veto on most issues. And as we know, President Biden, a Democrat, is still president for 2 more years. So what I do expect is further gridlock in Washington over the next 2 years. And on most issues, there will be no major changes from the current course of immigration policy, at least until the next election in 2024. And at that time, I imagine in the campaigns, immigration will once again be front and center, as it is in every American election. So what is the current course? To really delve into that, we need to look back and understand that when Biden took over, he inherited a lot of policies from President Trump when he enacted a lot of restricted travel and visa policies during COVID targeted at several countries. President Biden has rolled back the most restrictive of these policies, especially regarding Chinese students and international students in general, but there's still much more work to be done. Many of those policies, he changed the interpretation of it, but they're still on the books. So depending on who follows him, there could be more problems if those policies aren't taken off the books. When COVID hit, the applications processing was slowed or halted for long periods of time in the US and at the embassies and consulates around the world. USCIS, which is our immigration agency that processes applications, they are now under a loose mandate to speed up processing times, especially for the employment-based visas, which are the skilled migration visas. Congress has told them they need to prioritize that, but there's no specifics as to the prescription on how to do that. So most immigration lawyers I talk to on a regular basis, they think things will improve, but they're not expecting any wild changes immediately. During COVID, there were a lot of these visas, both family and employment visas, that weren't used because they weren't conducting any interviews, and those have been rolled over into the following years. This year, there's still expected to be over 200,000 employment-based visas issued, and that's compared with the normal year of about 140,000. Last year, there was about almost 300,000, about 280,000. We haven't had that final number come out yet. But all those extra visas are from the unused visas that got rolled over. So with these unused rolled visas due to COVID, most Chinese immigrants, that's their biggest opportunity right now if they want to get into the US quickly. Because China is such a big category of influx, certain areas have backlogs because of country quotas, which China and India in particular are the two countries that are most affected by those. So the quickest visa where people can get into the US is our EB-1A Extraordinary Talent Visa, which is very similar to the Canadian Extraordinary Talent Visas. And those are for the top performers of candidates performing in their industry, across industries. And our companies, this is our highest category of inquiries right now. We're processing a lot of these cases. There's very high demand. The natural interest waiver is another category that's fairly easy to qualify if you're qualified for that. And those are for reserved for specialized technical job categories where the US doesn't have enough applicants, and that's such as airline pilots and medical personnel. And certain categories of engineering personnel and high-tech personnel also could fit that. But once again, it's trying to fill a need within our society because we can't fill it ourselves. The EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program is a very popular one with Chinese immigrants, but there's a very long backlog over the last several years, up to 10 years for some candidates. That program had expired and was just reauthorized last year, and earlier this year, in the spring. And there are some new categories in there with special reserve visas that will get special priority processing, and those new investors won't have to wait for their visas when they are approved. The EB-5 category is also seeing heightened interest from Europeans who can afford it, who wish to move to the US before winter comes and the energy crisis deepens there. As for other employment visa categories, for years there have been strong lobbying efforts from the big corporations in Washington to increase their quota numbers. Right now, the US unemployment rate is low, but for various reasons, the job openings are skewed toward the lower wage entry-level jobs. And you see that once you unpack the statistics. So for the lower entry jobs, there's plenty of job openings. For the more skilled jobs, especially mid-management and upper management, there's actually quite a few people looking for work now that aren't reflected in that, because when COVID hit, they maybe stepped out of the market, took an early retirement, and now they're looking to get back in, but they're not reflected in those statistics. So for frontline industry, we have a very big need right now. There's a palpable push to raise the number of temporary non-agricultural HB2 visas. And those traditionally are for the more unskilled workers and the frontline essential workers. Most jobs would fit that. And right now there's only about 66,000 of those visas a year available. But as I said, there is a push because we have so many job openings that Americans right now aren't willing to fill. Another outlier issue in immigration that I would be remiss if I didn't discuss is that it's becoming more important nationally and in our politics, where we might see some big changes before the next election out of necessity, and that's our southern border crisis, where there are large numbers of immigrants continually illegally crossing into the US, and many of these border cities and states just don't have the resources available to manage the influx of people who require most essential services. And that's starting to spread inward to other non-border areas as our federal policy is to bus these people and fly them to other inland states who are not prepared for it. So obviously there's a human rights issue there too in getting the services to people, but locally people see their taxes paying for services that they're not getting themselves. So it's creating a political schism that will be reflected in the next presidential election for sure, especially as we go into a recession and more and more people are living paycheck to paycheck or losing their jobs. So this isn't a new issue at all. In every presidential election, it's been a major issue, at least since 2016, when George Bush 43, the son, won that election. Typically, it's a big election issue, but then as soon as the new president gets into the office, it kind of gets pushed aside because it's so comprehensive that just not much happens but piecemeal. And usually, unfortunately, for the refugee and lower income immigrants, it usually is focused on the higher skilled and wealthier individuals. So that's just one thing to keep in mind and to keep on our radar as you're watching the US elections. Political pressure is building for the current administration to address this issue, even among Democratic cities and states who are distancing themselves from President Biden in this last election. So also another thing to consider is in recent months regarding the southern border issue, President Biden has been quietly reinstating some of the Trump policies that he ended as soon as he took office. And this is regarding the wall and the physical barrier and whether or not applicants are allowed to stay in the US or if they have to go back over the border. So some of these have been rescinded. The news isn't really reporting it, but it is happening. Another thing is the southern border is increasingly becoming a major entry point for human trafficking, as well as for drugs and other crime. And this isn't necessarily just people from South America. We're starting to see more and more people from Africa and from the Middle East come in via this channel as well. And that's part of why the federal agencies are starting to give it a little bit more eyes on it. Different agencies assessing what they need to do. So obviously my experience in my discussion here focuses on the more affluent cases for immigration, the people who can pay a consultant to talk with them. But as I said, some of these problems and challenges that USCIS is experiencing, that's throughout the agency. And they've been underfunded for a long time. They've been understaffed for a long time. And during COVID, they lost a lot of people. A lot of the foreign embassies, the US embassies on foreign soil and consulates, we lost a lot of people who during COVID chose to return back to the US. That means right now, some of those embassies and consulates are still understaffed, or if they're not, they're training new employees, new staff, and they just don't have the institutional knowledge to process cases as quickly as before. So we have the challenge of bringing new resources to the game, as well as how long is it going to take to get all these folks trained up so we can process all these backlogs quickly. And with that, I think I'll stop here. And if there are any questions later, I'm happy to talk more specifically about any of these issues or anything else that maybe I skipped over, because obviously it's a big depth of field and we have such a short time. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Thank you for the very insightful analysis of the U.S. immigration policies. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Mike Liu. Mike is a former managing director and legal representative for DXC Technology China region. And before that, Mr. Liu was the global vice president, country head, and the legal representative for Infosys in Greater China region. Now he's the vice president of China Global Talent Society, and we have a lot of cooperation in international talent research. So the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chi, for here. Well, actually, this is my second time to join this meeting with IOM. First of all, I really want to congratulate IOM and the CCG for completing this I would say marvelous work. It is very insightful, as Maria was sharing the numbers, right? It is my pleasure to join this very stimulating panel discussing. I can resonate many great points like Dr. Fang was talking about and Ta was talking about, right? I look at one of things, if I really relate to the three questions here, I look at the future, we have to take a consideration of this intensified geopolitics and global issues like Russia, Ukraine issue, global warming, like, hurricane we also talk about, right? I look at the things is getting more and more complicated. And this is why I look at the IOM and, international organization can play a much more important role to provide the guidance, right? And I look at even like this panel discussing, it is a great platform to share the different opinion and foster the collaboration from different areas, so we can be able to, gather all different opinions to put in the future, I would say, study or report. I feel this is very important. Sometimes I was saying during the turbulent time, we need some calm voices. We need some, report to really shed the light for the, society. If I really look back, my background is many, commercial sectors. Also, I have been, heavily involved in the working visa, last time for Indians to get a working visa in China, and also for in China for getting the working visa for Indians and Chinese to work in the US, right? We have seen a significant, change. If I look at my personal experience here for Chinese immigration, I would say the services, they have been very proactively to work out the policy to help to promote, to get those foreign talents to work in China, right? I look at the, right now, if I look at as what I mentioned earlier with all this global, geopolitics, how we can see continued effort or promotion to encourage those legitimate free flow of talents from country to country, right? I think certain guidance policy are required to continue the momentum, because I look at the human capital is not the asset of one particular country, but the world, right? So how we should be able to continue the promotion or get awareness to promote those practice, that would be number one. Number two, I look at even right now, we are still in the middle of the, COVID-19 pandemic. I look at, I gave an example, maybe now in Singapore become a very hot spot to attract the, those, I would say, knowledge workers, right? What's a policy for other places, right? For the US, for the Europe, for China, right? Also recently, I was reading a, report showing many Japanese experts. They are, coming to China to work in China because Chinese government have been promoting this innovation, and they give a lot of emphasis investment in certain research area, right? So what kind of things you see for the country like China, or even for India, for the US, Singapore, or Europe, right? Rather than individual country, they have their own policy in certain areas, maybe is competing with each other. What's guidance we can have for maybe from IOM to promote this equity, as well as the free flow of talent from all the country, or go to those country according to individual study or research needs, right? I will certainly, that will help bring the world into a better place. The other thing is with the crisis going on in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, what's a policy, what's a process, how we can promote, the try to mitigate this humanity crisis, right? How we are able to, help those people in need, during the crisis. Certainly, that's another thing. Leadership, we expect, everybody to have a play in this addressing these global challenges, right? The other thing, if I look at the amazing experience, as we travel from country to country, I do have a belief in the technology, right? If you look at the technology, certainly can help to reduce the human dependency, or even for some the understaffed circumstances, technology can come in play, right? If I look at how can use automation tools to simplify the application, as well as going through the maybe immigration check, I would say checklist, as well as post the experience. I really look at this is not maybe not only for the developed country, but especially very important for those developing countries, how you can provide a better technology experience to make immigration a better experience, right? I look at since this IOM report have been going on for a while, maybe in the future edition, maybe we can elaborate a few good references in certain area. Definitely technology, I would say, is an area maybe we can put more emphasis to show the case study, so we can increase the awareness to, from one country to other countries, right? Definitely, that will be a very good experience for the entire business communities, right? Given the time, I would like to stop here, and thanks again for having me in this stimulating conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I agree more with your comment about talent is an asset for the world. This is actually what CCG believes, and we initiate AGTO Alliance of Global Talent Organizations. It is alliance for like people of relevant who have relevant interests gathered together and discussing and provide policy advices and try to improve the governance of talents. So it's quite related to our mission, and also I think it's also a belief and a mission of IOM. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, next, I would like to invite Professor Liu Yipeng. Professor Liu's research interests center on international entrepreneurship, global talent management, and the emerging markets, multinationals, global strategy from a cross-cultural and comparative perspective by embracing the notion of West meet East. Professor Liu, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to join today's event to launch this Chinese version of World Migration Report 2022. I'd like to share my opinion or my readings on this report in relation to my own research. As the host mentioned, my research areas primarily related to entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial talent. So I think I'd like to share 3 points. So first, when we think about the United Nations 2030 agenda, Mr. Grossetti also mentioned, and Marie McAuliffe also mentioned this United Nations 2030 agenda in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So not only the societal challenge will actually put additional obstacles for migration or talent mobility, but on the other hand, talent, particularly entrepreneurial talent, can make a great contribution to address global challenges. For instance, as we're facing the global health crisis, COVID-19, we know a lot of great invention, or such as the BioNTech, they partner with Pfizer to develop a vaccine. Actually, the founder of BioNTech is a migrant. So that is just an example to show the power of migrant when they move across borders by working together with other scientists, business community to really address the global challenges. I think this 2022 report also touch upon a couple of the other global challenges. For example, chapter 9 talk about climate change. So as we know, today, climate change has become a pressing global issue, really, and ranging from both the advanced economy and also developing countries. So if we take China example, China also committed to the world, saying that China tries to achieve the carbon neutrality. So I think in addressing the global challenges and in order to achieve sustainable development for the humankind, talent, especially like migration of global talent, can make a really important impact. So secondly, I think we're living in a disruptive time. So the uncertainty almost become a notion of everyday vocabulary. So in the digital economy, and particularly advancement technology, we also need to think about how we can better address the challenges by using talent in combination with the technology development. Right. So in this case, not only, let's say, the engineering or science talent is important, or the STEM sector. So I know in a number of countries, they issue the visa, particularly targeted at STEM, science, technology, math, and engineering. But in reality, the non-STEM sector are also quite important. From the social science perspective, I believe in order to address these challenges, we really need the combination of working together approach, both the science and engineers, but also with the social scientists. Because at the end of the day, we determine whether machine work or not the other way around. So I think in the report also in chapter 11, also talk about AI, so artificial intelligence. So it has become a very important topic worldwide. But how can we really take advantage of technology advancement in order to serve the humanity, serve the society better? That requires a collaboration, both science, engineers, and also social science and industry experts. So I think that's my second point. My third point is related to a little bit like the regional characteristics. So I think Maria in her opening presentation talked about in the report, there's regions, but the regions are more like kind of macro regions. I think within a certain countries, so I'll take China as example. So even though China is quite huge, but actually there are regional differences. So when we think about the talent policy today, so I think Tony said he's a talent attracted back to China, coming back and forth quite often. But we also need to think about, for a country such as China, how you can really mobilize the resources in an efficient way. Otherwise, it will become the way that regions compete against each other and waste certain resources. So I think in order to better balance and utilize the talent resource, particularly, I mean here, the entrepreneur talent, we really need to think about the regional characteristics, industry structure, in order to have a match between the entrepreneur talent and the regional development goals. In doing so, the regions can develop further or develop better. And in a similar way, we'll think about regional collaboration and global collaboration. There's also a way to think about how the regions or the different characteristics of more country level characteristics can help us to work together. So I will conclude with the SDG 17. I think the SDG 17 is about collaboration or international partnership. So I think without collaboration, without partnership, we cannot really address efficiently or successfully the global challenges because they are very complex and they really cover multi-disciplines. And within this domain, talent, especially migration of talent, can play a significant role. So I'm very delighted to join this event. So I look forward to continue our collaboration with IOM, with CCG, and hopefully we can move along this path and in the end really contribute to the UN's 2030 agenda. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Liu. Both you and Mr. Liu, you both mentioned the word talent. I think I want to explain the idea of talent here because when we see talent, some people will see it as a very exclusive group of people. It's a small group of people with probably with high IQs, high EQs. But actually the term talent in Chinese, we call it 人才. 人才 is like, I think everyone can be a 人才, a talent. So it doesn't mean that it's only a small group of people. So I think actually the talent research in China and the migration research in an international stage have a lot of things to exchange and collaborate. So I think there are lots of space for the Chinese researchers to contribute to the World Migration Report. The next, I would like to invite Professor Zhang. Is a very famous researcher in studying migration in China. He's working in Jinan University. Jinan University is like the center of, not center, but one of the centers of migration research in China. So we are very honored to invite you here. Professor Zhang, could you please share your ideas with us?
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm the last one, but I'm trying to be brief. Yeah, although the last one, but I still, thank you for your invitation and to participate this very, good opportunity to, to learn systematically, about this report. And also I'd like to, congratulations again. And, the work now, I mean, the working time for this report actually, happened in the past 3 years, and especially, during this COVID-19 period, is not only make the mobility for people difficult, but also make the researchers getting difficult. But I think, this difficult period, but also, but good, this report finally comes out. And also it is not easy, for the translation. I mean, normally, in the Chinese, we also say in Chinese, universities like the scientific organization, the academic evaluations does not account for, for the translation as a production. So it's really is a kind of public goods, and efforts. So, in this sense, I think the CCG and this Dr. Chu and really did a good job. I think is going to provide this report, like the peoples, they do not have a very good English, they could really circulate to read to get the report. And this is really need to, and thank you. And the second point I want to mention is that what I learned, to be very briefly, yeah, I think the first of all is that when we talk about the migration, especially international or transnational migration, normally traditionally we really, pay our attention to the policy, the governance, the receiving countries and, the sending countries, their restrictions, their, push and pull. And, but now I think, especially in the last 3 years and the pandemic, right, epidemic, the disease could be a very, very important for the people's mobility. And this really, like, my impression is that the transnational migration, it seems for us, for the researchers, is a irreversible trend. But now it's, for me, I think the transnational migration still is very fragile and also is weak, because of this, not only natural disaster, but also by this disease. And also this led us, the researchers, but also, the government officials, try to understand, how to encourage, to sustain, and also to protect, the international migration, how it is important and how it is difficult. In future, it's really give us a lot of pressures and burdens, I think, for scholars to realize the importance of this research. The second things I want to mention, what I learned, actually, I try to be brief, is that China's role. And actually, I think both Dr. Wang and, and Dr. Chu, and you mentioned, the report, the China's role in the report. And it seems, especially the two things actually are getting very impressive for me. China traditionally normally to be the biggest sending country or the country of origins, but now it's it says the second. But not only for this, for the origin, but now China is getting to be one of the biggest to receive, the migration. And in terms of students, for example, and especially in Asia, now we are the biggest receiving country for international students. And not only for the people itself, but also in terms of the remittance. And I think, Maria just mentioned about the remittance. And it's very impressive, China, and according to this report, and China is the second largest receiving the international and remittance. But very impressed me is that now China is the number 6, I think, is as a significant source of the international remittance. So this means, the China's role or China's position in international migration, is getting not only important. It was important, but it's changing. So, and in this sense, my last point actually see something about China's relevance, and go back to Dr. Chu's, the question, the third, about China's role in international, in the governance, but not only governance. What I want to see is mention, several things. One of the facts or the phenomena, according to the Chinese officials, the figure, and now both the scholars and government recess, now the Chinese, we have 60 million of Chinese diaspora, or we call them Huaqiao Huayan. It's very interesting. We are not using the Chinese diaspora, but we're using Chinese overseas or overseas Chinese. So in the figure, so 60 million, and we have more than 30 million. We call them returned overseas Chinese, and the overseas Chinese, their relatives. If putting these two figure together, normally now we have more than 1 million people. We call them Huaqiao Huayan and Guiqiao Qiaojuan, right? So this, in terms of this figure, and China's international migration, especially China's immigration, it's a very important part of international migration. So this is number one. Number two, it's about China's policy. From the Qing dynasty, actually, from the Qing dynasty and from the, 19th centuries and late 19th centuries, when have the very massive, international migration. I mean, Chinese just go overseas, and of course, recently more and more people are getting, into China. So, and when the new century started, actually, there are more than 20 countries. They learn, not purely learn, I mean, from China, but also they did learn from China's experience. They established a kind of minister level, not attract only the talented, but also for the ordinary, people's mobility. So this is number 2. Number 3 is the research organization. China, I think we have one of the largest group of scholars, and we have a lot of academic research organizations are doing the Chinese international migration, especially the Chinese overseas. Like my institute, and next week, at the end of next week, we are going to hold a conference. Actually, there is one famous, called the International Society for the Studies of Chinese Overseas. It's 30 years already. And this year, in the US, California, Berkeley University will host this conference. But because of this, the COVID-19, and most of the mainland Chinese scholars, we could not really travel to the US for this 2 days conference. But for this, and Jinan University, my institution, we are holding a parallel conference purely for the Chinese mainland scholars. But actually, we have, we have 150 presenters. We restricted already. Otherwise, I think more than 200 scholars, they are doing this kind of research. So this is just one example. And also, like the CCG, like our, my institute, and like, we also have a national association of the overseas Chinese history studies. We have a group of, scholars, and a bunch of important organizations are doing this kind of studies. And we have a lot of publications yearly, like we have a different, the book, like just, this report. And we have yearly, like 华侨华人研究报告, right? Not my school, but also we have some other, institution, they publish that. And of course, if you go into the, the academic papers and monographs, there were several hundreds, so this is getting very important. In sum, I think, China's role in international migration, and it was important in past, it is important in present, and I think it's going to be very important in future. And I do hope that how do this group of Chinese scholars, include me, I think, how do we can participate? And we hope we can participate and also contribute, to this, the World Migration Report and in future. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. I think you have made a very good summary of China's development from history to current situation, from policies to government setup, and also about the research area, researching migration. And you also speaks for the Chinese researchers about your voices, your intentions of participating in world migration research. Thank you very much. So time passes so quickly. I think I wish we could have more discussions. I believe that everyone has a lot of questions and to discuss further. But I think that maybe we should come to an end now. Yes. So I would like to say thank you to every speaker who shared their insightful opinions at this seminar. And I think through discussion, I feel that there are a lot of issues that deserve attention and further research. Hopefully, we can see this relevant research results in the coming in the world migration reports in the future. So last but not least, I'd like to recommend our audience to Google for world migration report and download it. And also we are going to add a link on the CCG website to promote it. So and if you find any problems regarding translation, just don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again for each speaker, Mr. Kochiti and Dr. McAuliffe, Mr. Jackson, and Professor Liu, Professor Zhang, Professor Fang, and Mike. Thank you all, and goodbye. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Xu.